Hello and welcome to this special interview with one of the greatest authors who wrote about the Algerian Revolution and who spent her entire life fighting for freedom and against colonialism and racism around the world and mainly in Algeria. Elaine Mokhtefi, welcome.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Osama, and thank you, 24-Hour News, and thank you, Algeria. It's wonderful to be back in Algiers once again.
So, to start with, Elaine, you came back to Algeria with a book under the title Algiers, the Capital of Revolution, which was published in another version in English as well in the United States. Why this book at this time?
Well, it took, I was very shy about narrating my experience with the Algerian Revolution. And at one point, my husband decided that it was time for him to write his own memoirs of his life as a freedom fighter, as a member of the Algerian Liberation Army. He had always more or less felt that it was up to him, it was his duty to write about the men he had fought with, the men who didn't come back, the men who were maimed, the men that we should all remember and respect. And finally he sat down one day and started writing and said to me, "And you've got a lot of stuff in your head, you've got to put it down on paper." And so there we were in two separate rooms, writing our memoirs about the Algerian experience, and finally they both turned into books by Balzac, the publisher here in Algiers, and in English my book was published by Verso, who has offices in London and New York, and Mokhtar's was finally published in English also.
Your book, Algiers, the Capital of Revolution, talks about a very sensitive period of the Algerian Revolution during the French colonialism. But we have seen that the English version of this book was under the title Algiers, the Capital of the Third World. Do you think there is a different message through the title in the two versions of the book?
Well, in a way, there is, in the sense that the Third World is a term that was less used in French. And the original title was the Third World. And the Third World as a concept has completely disappeared. There is no Third World anymore. It was the world that was the world between the East and the West. And now there's only one world, the capitalist world, with its variations. But at the time, the Third World was a motivating expression, and we felt that there was a possibility of a real Third World existing and progressing and giving notice to the other two worlds that they were there and that they had something to say.
Mm-hmm. So you want to say that even the Third World does not exist nowadays. Do you think that this is related to the New World Order?
I think that we've finally ended up with one world. One world, not the one world of one government or one, but I think there's a capitalist world and with its variations, and that's what we live with today. The Third World as a concept is gone.
Mm-hmm. So we have seen that you said Algiers in both versions. Why Algiers?
Algiers was Algiers, the capital of the country that I think led one of the most important anti-colonialist struggles the world has ever known. And Algiers hasn't been acknowledged in the way that it should have been, in that as a memory of a people who stood up and struggled for their independence from colonialism. I mean, after the war, Second World War, Indochina stood up, and we all recognized the importance of that war. And then came the Algerian War, and I think there is less acknowledgement of the importance of that war in the 20th century. It was one of the great wars of the 20th century.
So within the book, you said, with its two versions, you said Black Panthers, freedom fighters, revolutionaries, and even in the French version, you said Fanon, from Fanon to Black Panthers.
Yes,
Why Fanon?
Well, the English version was, of course, written first, and it was only, it was a number of years later that the second edition in French was published. And by that time, Frantz Fanon was better known. And he's become more and more studied and reflected upon and known and told about and so on in recent years. And I suppose that the editors of the book in French felt that it was a strong word to put into the title. And the Black Panthers were particularly felt very strongly about Fanon. They insisted that every chapter of the Panthers throughout the United States study his books. They studied both Black Masks, white masks and black faces, and The Wretched of the Earth, and every single chapter of the Black Panther Party.
But few people from your audience, or maybe those who read your book, know that you had a close relationship with Frantz Fanon and Black Panthers.
Well, I met Frantz Fanon in Accra, in Ghana, during the war, the Algerian War, when he had just recently been named ambassador to Africa for the GPRA, the provisional government of the Algerian Republic. And his headquarters were in Accra. And I was, at that point, director of I was charged with setting up a conference headquarters for the World Assembly of Youth. Youth from the entire world, from every continent, came to Accra for their Congress. And I organized that meeting, and after I was there, Frantz Fanon had been invited to address the meeting, and he came to the Congress, and he spent a lot of time at the Congress advocating for Algerian independence, saying that resolutions were written about African independence, and he was extremely active, and I got to know him, as well as the Algerian delegate. There was an Algerian delegate there from Ujema, Mohammed Sanoun, and the three of us sort of became a committee for in the independence resolutions that Congress put out.
Really interesting history that you can recall at this time, especially that Frantz Fanon is really known for his fighting against apartheid and colonialism, especially in Africa, which was the main colony of the world, if we can say that.
Yes, he became very closely associated with people like Moumier, like Lumumba. He went to Congo several times before Lumumba was killed, and with a delegation of Algerians who were in favor of Lumumba's government and who helped to maintain it, but of course we know how unsuccessful it was, and it was a tragedy. And Frantz Fanon traveled around Africa to various meetings and meeting people and trying, by that time, in the Liberation Army and the ALN, they were already training freedom fighters from those countries in the ALN camps. Even Mandela came and was in 1961 and was trained in an ALN camp among the soldiers of the Algerian Liberation Army. In fact, it was so important to him that when he went back to South Africa, he was, of course, imprisoned. He was imprisoned for 20 years. But the first country he visited when he was let out of prison was Algeria. And he stood before the crowds here and screamed, "I am Algerian."
And everybody can remember this visit and this speech of Nelson Mandela. You are the wife of a former militant of the FLN, who is your husband, Mokhtefi. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2015, and his book, his biography, if we can say,
yes, his memoirs,
was published a year after his death. But how can you, or what can you tell us about the influence represented by your husband in your writing about the Algerian Revolution?
Oh, well, he had tremendous, of course, he had a tremendous influence over me. And I had a great respect for his intelligence, for his life experience, for the life experience of someone who was born in a colonial world and who was one of the few members of his family who had any kind of education. His grammar school teacher saw that he wasn't meant for village life, and he helped him get into a lycée. He was the only member of a family of 6 boys that was able to attend a lycée. And he graduated from one in Blida and immediately was very active during his high school years within a secret organization of the FLN. And immediately as he got out, did everything possible to enlist in the ALN, and he did so and had training as a signal corps operator.
So we have seen that the book introduces anti-colonialism and anti-racism ideas, especially when it came to Black Panthers. Do you think you have similar roots with Black Panthers' root in fighting against colonialism?
Yes, I mean, I think that the fight, when we went to the United States and Mokhtar saw Harlem, he saw the conditions in which people, the Black people of the United States, colored people of the United States, were existing. He realized that there was that in a sense Algerians were Black Americans.
The introduction of the book, which I really liked, especially the English version, it said in the preface, "This is a story with a beginning and an end." How could this even be a story, and how can you introduce the words beginning and end in the book?
That's a difficult one to answer, but I suppose that the beginning is that we were both, or we were all, victims of some kind of racism and discrimination. And as such, we learned to fight against it. I personally, from a Jewish family, and we lived at the height of anti-Semitism in the United States. And you had to get used to being discriminated against, and you had to fight against it. And the similar experiences of Algerians against French colonialism they're formative. And you don't get away from that sort of thing. It lives with you for your whole life. You fight against the discrimination, anti-Semitism. These are concepts that remain with you all your life, and the fight is internal.
Elaine's early life in the United States, it is clear that it was difficult, especially that the United States was living a, let's say, severe situation, especially in the late 30s and the early 40s before the Second World War. But let's go back to the book. One thing that attracted me too is you saying we were fellow militants and the future was ours. So here, Elaine was vacillating from being involved in the revolution. And in another paragraph, you said, I was a fly on the window, looking in, beating its wings. So how could Elaine combine these two expressions and these two, let's say, these two situations in the Algerian Revolution?
Well, you know, I joined the FLN office in New York and worked with the few militants, activists who manned that office. And I felt that we were behind a great cause. Our role was to invite the United Nations to pass a resolution in favor of Algerian independence. And it took, every year we did the same thing. We did the same lobbying and the same activity in our attempt to get that resolution passed. It finally achieved, it finally was passed in 1961 after 7 years of war. And France had great control over its former colonies that had liberated and was very threatening that they should not vote for that resolution.
Yeah, however, you played a very...
So we did our best.
But you, as a person, you played a very pivotal role in the UN representing Algeria during the 50s, if I'm not mistaken.
We did our best. Once a year, a delegation arrived from Tunis. Mainly, it was usually headed by Belkacem Krim. And there were people like Mohamed Ben Yahya, Ahmed Francis, Ahmed Boumediene, and so on, who were members of the delegation. And they spread out through the city, visiting the various delegations and trying to influence them for passage of this resolution. It was tough work. I mean, we had a very strong enemy. And but there was also, after the Second World War, we have to remember that we thought fascism was defeated forever, and that all of the colonial countries were going to get freedom, and that there was a new world was born. And of course, little by little, we realized that this was not so. But for us, it was a time of great great hope.
It was hope. Speaking of freedom, maybe you can tell us about your vision towards freedom nowadays and freedom fighting, like all those who are militants for their freedom around the world, especially amidst the current situation, which is seeing major developments and changes. How can you take this?
Well, I mean, we live in a sad world, in a world that's threatened by the climate, but also by a certain reaction. There's, in the United States, it's obvious that reaction can take over. I hope not, but it can take over. And there's a renewal of different sorts of fascism throughout the world. We see it in Europe. We see it throughout the world. And the world we thought of at the end of the Second World War, that was going to be a perfect world of justice and
freedom and hope.
We see that now many countries have lost their freedom, and there's a certain kind of desperation. What will the future bring us? God only knows.
Yeah, but what can you tell or what can you say to young freedom fighters around the world, and mainly in Nigeria?
I think the solidarity, you have to stick to your cause. You have to, the solidarity is important. That we have to think as highly and strongly of people in the United States, like Black Americans, like the underprivileged Latinos. We have to think of them as strongly as we think of the African countries and the wars. We have to fight against them. We have to respect the word solidarity and join hands together as far as possible.
So I just want to go back to Elaine and her trip from the United States. And in the book, you included many elements of your personal life. How does it feel, a young girl who finds herself in Algeria and then fighting for the Algerian cause?
Well, it was the highlight of my life. It was my cause too. It was part of the world I wanted to see achieve its ends, and certainly wasn't alone. There were many people who arrived in Algeria in 1962 and 1963 to help rebuild the country. We were all moved by the same feelings of solidarity.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We have reached the end of our special interview with you. It was a pleasure for us to be with you. You received us with a warm heart, and we really appreciate that. You can say, maybe you can transmit a message through our screen.
It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and long live Algeria.
Thank you, Elaine. So, for now, we have reached the end of our special interview with an icon who wrote about the Algerian Revolution and who sacrificed her life fighting for freedom. Bye for now.